The supranational organization that our group chose was the United Nations, or UN for short. So there are 195 countries in the world today, and out of this 195, 193 countries are member states of the UN. Our 6 case study countries are all a part of the UN. The 2 countries that are not members of the UN are the Vatican City and Palestine. The permanent members of the United Nations Security Council are China, France, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, 3 of which are a part of our case study countries. So, after World War I, an international group developed, the League of Nations, to solve disputes between countries. And when World War II started, the League of Nations failed, but they highlighted the need for a new reformed organization that could promote global peace. In August of 1941, FDR and Winston Churchill had a secret meeting where they came up with a declaration called the Atlantic Charter that outlined the goals of World War II and paved the way for the development of the UN. Afterwards, at the Yalta Conference, the Big Three, which is pictured down below, Churchill, FDR, and Stalin, established the UN, which included a General Assembly and a Security Council. The 5 permanent members of this council had veto power over the General Assembly, and new members had to be recommended by the Security Council and accepted by a 2/3 vote from the General Assembly. So the UN's purpose and goals are outlined in the UN Charter. According to that, the UN has 4 main goals: to keep peace throughout the world, to develop friendly relations among nations, to work together to help poor people live better lives, to conquer hunger, disease, and illiteracy, and to encourage respect for each other's rights and freedoms, and to be a center for helping nations achieve these goals.
Some of the current goals and agendas of the UN, one is to maintain international peace and security. So you have the UN Security Council that deals with mainly global security issues. Then you have the General Assembly that's pretty much the main decision-making and policy-making body of the UN. And then you have the Secretary General who works with all different bodies of the UN. Next is protecting human rights. So the UN has their own Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and that sort of brings human rights back into the realm of the world's interest. Next, you have delivering humanitarian aid. So the UN is relied upon by the international community to coordinate humanitarian relief operations, whether that be for man-made disasters or natural disasters. Then you have promoting sustainable development. So the UN wants to improve people's well-being, and that continues to be one of their main focuses. Then next is upholding international law. So the UN, to an extent, acts as its own sovereign state. So they have courts, they have tribunals, they have multilateral treaties and the security councils, and all of these are peacekeeping missions to sort of uphold that global peace mission. And they have the authority to use force when there is a threat to international peace and security. So, what benefits do the member states get from their membership when they become a member of the UN? So the UN creates a unified alliance so that member states aren't burdened to tackle domestic problems on their own. These problems could be daunting for any state, let alone those that don't have enough resources. So the UN sort of creates this one alliance that can sort of help chip away at a problem one step at a time. And then another benefit is a more functional global economy rooted in states working together. A global economy can benefit all parties involved. So that's another benefit of membership. Protecting a member state civilians, which can help democratize and legitimize a regime, especially one that's, again, democratizing or sort of in that process. And then you have shared global challenges requires international collaboration. So member states can rely on other members for help during times of great need. So again, that sort of idea of collaboration and working together and creating this unified alliance.
How does your organization influence domestic policymakers in their member countries? The United Nations has different goals they put in place each year, which policymakers in member countries focus on for that year. While the United Nations does not have the power or the authority to directly impact domestic policymaking, they do create international law and establish international norms that all member countries are expected to abide by, at least on paper. The United Nations also sets international precedents, provide assistance, legal assistance, and promote international cooperation among member countries. Does your organization impact national sovereignty in the member countries? If so, how? The United Nations is not allowed to infringe on sovereignty. The repertoire of the practice of the Security Council states that the United Nations may not intervene in matters which are essentially within the domestic jurisdiction of any state. The United Nations creates international law. Even if a member country doesn't vote for it, they are still required to abide by it. The Security Council can send peacekeeping forces to restore order when needed. It can also impose sanctions on states, and member nations are required to comply.
Is this organization obsolete? Why/why not? So obviously, in the sense that the UN still exists, it's not obsolete because it's not over. However, a lot of people argue that it is obsolete, or it's moving towards kind of being obsolete because it's not very effective. So for example, yes, the UN is unhelpful in many situations would be the contention. And then they could say something like, sanctions issued by the UN to North Korea haven't deterred the country from testing hydrogen bombs. So essentially that's just saying that people aren't, or countries aren't abiding by international law. So it's obsolete in that way. They haven't been able to prevent the massacre and prosecution of Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar, and they can't stop the devastating war in Syria. So in war-torn areas, they're unable to bring peace, which is a large part of the UN platform, and they haven't been able to protect human rights. Once again, we see that with the LGBT community in Chechnya. So people that would say that the UN has and continues to accomplish a lot would say that in the past, they've created the Convention on Human Rights, they've created the Convention on the Rights of the Child, people with disabilities, have made human trafficking international law, environmental international law, and they also just create a global sense of unity, which isn't really a policy, but it's more of just a goal. And then they've also created laws for the future, so they continue to be effective in certain ways. For example, universal peer review, peacekeeping missions so they can go to those war-torn areas, and a lot of other laws. Evaluate the significance of your organization. So I actually personally think that the UN is at its probably peak significance now, especially during a global pandemic, because in these places with poverty and violence and security threats and things that they can't deal with on their own, they're also dealing with COVID-19 on top of that. So the UN has NGOs that can go in and help them. The UN itself can help these countries which are less privileged than ourselves. And it just creates a, once again, global sense of togetherness and unity. So that was our whole presentation. Bye.